Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Lit Happens episode with myself and Adriel. Today's Teacher Talk ep is all about discursive text and discursive writing. We're going to have a student question, give our 2 cents as Adriel and I always do, and then we'll have our teacher question. And before we get into that, welcome back to another week and another episode. Adriel, how are you traveling now? About 3/4 into term 2 when we record this. How are things?
Yeah, going well. It's a busy time of the year now with school camps and marking. Year 12 have just completed their assessment tasks. So, we're in the trenches at the moment in terms of trying to get every single minute that we have spare, but it's going well. I think one of the analogies I've used recently is you sort of look at the tasks that you have, tick them off slowly. You can't sort of climb Everest in a day. Well, I mean, some people can, and they're freaks, but
Yeah, most of us could not.
most normal
Yeah.
people will look at it and know. So you just take it step by step. But we're just sort of going through the motions and just ticking things off. And I think that's probably a nice little bit of encouragement because life does get busy. I try and measure each of my days by I tell the kids actually, the grey hairs. Probably can't see on the screen because I'm a bit far away, but yeah, I measure each stretch by the grey hairs. So there's quite a few at the moment, and we're trudging along. And look,
Yeah.
I think another sort of perspective that we put in is just grateful to actually have this opportunity to go into the classroom and then have a new day each and every day. So it's very important to look at those little things and just put things into perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that idea of just have that list and just keep plodding along. I know a lot of people are in the middle of report writing as well and things add up. But yeah, I like that. Have that list, keep plodding along. Before we know it, it'll be another well-earned school holidays break. So, and look, we've got the long weekend too, so that'll be nice. Having that Monday off will be like a little semi-reprieve. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it'll be
A bit
good.
of a break
I
till
actually
just
forgot that
the
we
end.
forgot that we
Yeah.
had to celebrate the King's birthday, so it's
Yeah,
had to.
I love it. If any other kings and queens want to have birthdays, I'm all for it. I'll wave a
100%.
flag if I have to. The more public holidays, the better.
It's
Yeah,
good. It's good.
all right.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into it, shall we? We'll start with our student question. That's when our students that are listening to our podcast, they have been telling us that they're getting a lot out of these teacher talk eps because they are hearing it from the perspective of what teachers might be thinking or doing, and they're finding it really, really, really valuable. So we'll get into it. So our student question all about discursive writing is, I don't know how to structure a discursive piece or make it sound natural. My writing feels more like a persuasive essay, or it just wonders, what do I do? It's a great question, that one.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting one because I think even the nature of the question, we're looking at kids overthinking what a discursive response is, just because it's a new term, really, and that's probably that starting point, isn't it? It's not really something that you should really overthink because we are naturally inclined to be discursive in nature, especially as human beings, because we like to look at multiple perspectives. This is one of the wonderful things about our subject of English is because we hopefully are instilling within students this idea to approach ideas, like back in the days when we used to do those different sorts of readings into text. So, for example, like a modernist reading or a postmodernist reading, or there's different sort of historical contexts that you might look at. We're looking at things from different perspectives. And again, I'll often frame this to students. If you've ever asked the question like, why do I have to do something? Or, how do I do something? You're already sort of facilitating that discursive thought. So it comes naturally to us. And the thing is, when something comes naturally to us and we overthink it, then it starts to sound too mechanical. And we look at the different steps. And I understand why students may feel like this because, we have our writing platforms that we instill from an early age now in schools, and it's that step-by-step process. Well, for example, do you have your pill paragraph going or your pedal paragraph going? And kids are so desperate to look at, well, is my point there? Is my piece of evidence there? Is my explanation there? And then so on and so forth. Whereas discursive
Yeah.
is a little bit more of a natural flowing sort of roundabout way, I like to sort of say, journey about the different perspectives pertaining to an idea. And again, when
Mm-hmm.
you overthink it, that's when you start to become mechanical. So to address this sort of question, how do I structure it? Just make sure you have your sort of idea at the core, and then you go on this journey as to what the different perspectives are. I know one of the common things that students are taught probably when they're looking at discursive writing from a junior perspective, so year 7, 8, maybe even 9 and 10 is when we start to introduce it into our courses. But a lot of teachers or a
Mm.
lot of things online will say that discursive responses are like for and against arguments. And I like to err away from that a little bit. And I know that a lot of teachers now are starting to understand how we sort of get to that teaching of it. But it's definitely not a for and against sort of debate or a discussion on either side of the fence. It's looking at different perspectives. And that's probably that important thing for us. It's you can have multiple perspectives on one
Mm.
side of the fence, and you could address all of these different perspectives in one sitting. It's just a variety of things where you're not really building an argument. And this is what sort of separates it from that persuasive essay that we'll come to sort of speak about a little bit later on. But that's that structured response, the persuasive response. Those discursive responses, will have humor in it. You'll add a little bit of satire. You'll have your rhetorical questions. You'll have your anecdotal evidence, and literally, I'm listing some of these thoughts. You might even have subheadings amongst your discursive thought. And I think the best thing is well, one of my favorite questions to ask students is, well, how have you got your reader to think about your subject area, the concept that you're trying to address? If you have
Mm-hmm.
instilled in them this, oh, okay, like I want to sort of have like that, that little monocle where, oh, that's interesting, or someone sort of thinking with their hand on their chin after they've read your piece. Oh, that's a new perspective you've given me, and I've never thought about an idea like that. I think that's sort of
Yeah.
like a good sort of discursive response when you have that thought instilled within your reader at the end of the day. But yeah, look, I think to address that first sort of part, that structure, just make sure you've got your technique. So, rhetorical questions, a nice title for your discursive response, anecdotal evidence. Those personal anecdotes work really well. Have stats and figures.
Yeah.
Uh, you're appealing to all of these different rhetorics that still are applicable to this writing form. But yeah, I'm sure as we do move along, here's the other thing: is the more you practice writing this form, the better you're going to get. And that at the core is probably
Yeah.
the most important piece of advice you'll hear today is you just have to practice the writing form. And and it's one of those things, like I said, that comes to us naturally. Don't overthink it. I think that's my piece of advice there for that first part of that question. How about yourself? What about some ideas you might have?
Yeah. No, I think you made an excellent point where you said it's often the reason that they kind of panic is I find students are like, well, I know how to write creatively and I know how to write an essay. And so, like, what do you mean I've got to do like a kind of in between
Yeah.
response? And yeah, I think a good way to look at it as well is it is more of a thoughtful exploration, and in some
Mm,
respects I think that takes the pressure off the kids too.
yeah.
It's like I want to hear some ideas on a topic, and I don't necessarily need to have your
Mm,
direct
mm,
interpretation and I'm batting this out. Like I just want to be able to discuss this, and you can talk about like discourse and all of those things, but
yeah.
even just thinking about article or a feature article, or
Yeah.
getting your students to pick a topic that they're interested in and just go find one website online that kind of
Yeah.
explores it a little bit, and then often they'll find some discursive elements there. But yeah, I do think they overthink it, and
Mm,
I think it doesn't help that it wasn't really a term or text that, I mean, I think we all did it, we just didn't necessarily call it discursive, and I think that's
mm,
what threw the kids. It's like, oh, it's got a new term, so it must be an entirely new thing, but I
yeah.
can think of tasks that even we had done, Adriel, with like year 10, where
Mm,
they had to write a bit of an article exploring or doing a bit of a
mm,
comparative task, and not necessarily for and against, but just kind of doing alternate views and interpretations and comparisons, and all those things I think are really
yeah.
useful doing in the classroom to help you create this discursive response. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think just for students, they've got to remember that it's about that exploration of these
Mm,
multiple perspectives. And so you'd still
mm,
structure it with an intro, a few body paragraphs, and a conclusion. And we often give our students some little pointers, like in your
yeah.
introduction, you might actually need to qualify or define your topic and
Mm,
introduce some of the different interpretations or categories or subtopics that might come under that. And I actually really like this, and I feel like once students start with discursive, they also enjoy it because it's a bit flexible. Like they can
yeah.
use subheadings, they can do body paragraphs, they could separate their paragraphs on whatever sub issue they wish to, or
Mm,
perspective,
mm,
I should say, they wish to talk about. And so once I think the important for students is you've got to pick a topic, and then once you
yeah.
pick a topic or issue, then you'll sort of get some ideas on the structuring. But yeah, in terms of like how do we make it sound natural, I mean, and not persuasive, you gave some really good
Mm,
pointers already on the types of
mm,
techniques that they should be incorporating. How do we help them kind of stay on track, I guess, so that students aren't feeling like they're just waffling or
yeah.
wondering? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it can feel that way, like I'm just saying a whole bunch of stuff. Like, what are
Yeah.
your kind of thoughts, or what have you
Yeah.
suggested to students in the past?
So I think like the important thing is here, like we're with this stop point that we've sort of come across, it's a discursive writing rewards thoughtful exploration. And the key word here is that word thoughtful. So often kids will get confused with discursive writing being just like a rambling of my internal thoughts about an idea. And I can obviously use my first person language and so on and so forth, which again throws students out because like, it's an essay. How come I'm allowed to use my personal response in my personal language? I think this is a big thing for students to understand.
Yeah.
You still need to use for a formal academic register, so your tone still needs to be formal in nature. It's a thoughtful exploration of perspectives.
Mhm.
It's not just a rant. I think that's a clear sort of distinction that we want to be looking at. And
Yeah, that's good.
I think when we're looking at like some practical sort of ideas for our students, remember your hook. So your hook could be like a rhetorical question. It could be like some sort of personal anecdote that gets people into the story or reader into the story. I remember one of our teachers who was fantastic. He used to read the newspaper quite a bit, gone other days that we have these, but he used to pull out these discursive articles or essays
Mm.
from, I think it was like the Sydney Morning Herald or one of those organizations there.
Yeah.
And it used to be like one of those things where you'd see quite a bit of these opinion pieces slash discursive essay responses, which I
Mhm.
I sort of think it's important for students to get an idea of reading, multiple ones. I know some of the Mod C texts in craft of writing
Yeah.
when they eventually get to that, they're fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but they're very higher order in nature, very much so, and then that can
Yeah.
often throw students as well. Whereas if you get like an everyday sort of example, and this is where our role as a teacher is quite important. Like we do the teaching here is how are we looking at like our life in the current, and this is why I love teaching in English is because you can have some thoughts, something may be thrown at you. You might have had conversation with people on the weekend, or you might have seen something out there, in the world, and you'd be like, oh, how's that relevant to
Mm.
what I'm teaching right now? I don't know about you, but like that's how I sort of think all the time. I know last week, this is not discursive writing, but we're doing a narratives unit with year 11 at the moment, and I know, there was a few thoughts put out there about different narratives, and I posed the question with students, and it was really cool because they were like, "Oh yeah, I heard that," and then they make the link to their
Mm.
current sort of situation. And similarly with the discursive writing, there are many discursive responses being put out there, especially with the current growth in areas like those Substack sort of blogs that are
True.
going out there
Yeah.
nowadays. Like even
Yes.
those blog sort
Yep.
of forums, even though they're called blogs,
Yes.
they're
Blogs are
actually
really good.
discursive in nature. Yeah,
They are, aren't they?
exactly.
Great.
Exactly
Great tip
right.
for
So
students too. Like if you've got a
yeah,
topic or a person or someone you're following, and you might just look at their Substack and read a couple of
yeah.
their articles, and you'll find they are quite discursive. Great tip. Yeah.
Ex- exactly. Yeah. And then like you read them and you'll see like I know after you read some of those blogs, you're just like, oh, that was interesting, or it either affirms or challenges, or gets you to reflect. Like, these are the terms that we're looking at in terms of these writings, and I definitely would get students to look at those. And if you're a teacher listening as well, like, get students to subscribe to someone that is quite influential in their world. And there are many Substacks out there. Substack's fantastic. I know, as a teacher myself, that is interested in the thoughts and ideas of a variety of people rather than just the individuals that are in my microcosm or my canon, I would say, like my little world that we
or
can
getting
often
caught
be.
in the algorithm. Yeah.
That's right, indulged in. It's good to sort of venture out there, just look at different ways that people think about the world. And I think those blog spots are definitely fantastic sort of stepping stone into discursive writing. And then obviously we have our proper structure. Okay, so simple things like, make sure you've got that hook, make sure you are addressing multiple perspectives. There might be some form of personal reflection, and that might be anecdotal in nature. And I think the big thing is when you're looking at a discursive piece, the discursive piece, or the idea for a discursive writing piece in the HSC, is not to emphasize preaching an idea. Like, you're not trying to convince people that this is the way you should think, which is that persuasive form. It much rather looks at the exploration of ideas, and I think this is a nice way we can sort of frame this. Discursive writing explores ideas; it doesn't preach them. So again, we're looking at the exploration. What are all the different sort of ideas? So it's not that in-depth analytical, critical idea where you're trying to prove an argument or support your thesis. It's, all right, these are all the different things associated with this perspective about the idea. And yeah, so remember, your voice, your tone control, like, it still needs to be sophisticated. It needs to have that academic formal register. And also, and I should mention this as well, make sure you're not just writing about, again, your thoughts and opinions. Like, make sure you are addressing the stimulus, because you will be given some form of stimulus writing platform, whether it be a quote or whether it be an image of some sort. Like, you have to integrate that piece of stimulus, and it needs to be sort of it's seamless in nature. So yeah, those are just some thoughts there. I honestly think the blog spots are fantastic for kids. And once again, I'll just mention this, like, discursive writing explores ideas. It doesn't preach them.
Yeah. I think that's the really impactful statement there for students to consider moving forward, so that they don't accidentally delve into that persuasive territory. And just as a last point as well for students, if you're still sitting and going, oh, okay, I know I need to read some stuff now. If there's no topic really at the moment that's standing out to you, think about an issue or idea or a theme or a concept that might have been explored in something that you studied. Like, let's say there was a text that you enjoyed last year or this year, and what was that issue, and then look into it. Like, I know I had a student, some of the text that we did was very much about like grief and loss, and they kind of their interest leaned a bit more towards psychology, and so their discursive was all about like grief, the stages of grief, and then they found obviously some clinical, then they talked about it from a clinical perspective, and they talked about it from a more social perspective. Yeah, then they even discussed the way that human growth and potential can come out of grief, for example. So sometimes I think we think, the different perspective has to be a different opinion, like a for and against. But exactly like you said, Angel, it's not really about that. It's more about different thoughts and interpretations for us to consider, rather than to try and convince somebody and for your reader to consider. So even maybe going that angle might be helpful. We might then transition, Adriel, into the teacher question, because I think we're naturally leaning that way now anyway. So from our teachers, what they often say in terms of discursive writing is, well, how do I actually teach discursive writing in an effective way so that students can see that there is a balance between exploration and that sense of control with what they're writing, and also balance that with the pressures of the syllabus and the pressures of like a stimulus that would come out in front of them. I guess, like, well, what are the bones and core elements I've got to teach for a discursive response? And then how do I support students in being able to work with that in terms of the specific demands of an assessment question or exam question?
Yeah, yeah. And I think when we're looking at like discursive responses here, we have to understand that the discursive form itself it's been around for ages. However, it's a new term. I think you mentioned this or alluded to this earlier on. Like we would have had this back when we were in our schooling
Yeah.
sort of thoughts, especially with our discussions. And I think it's like
Yes,
an elevated form of a discussion per se.
I
Like
think so.
uh, I
And
would say
that's a good
that's
way
what
of
your
putting it,
discursive response.
definitely.
Yeah, exactly. You're discussing, obviously, and this is where in the stage 6 course where we're looking at it in greater depth, thus it elevates itself from that discussion form, which is very surface level. We are moving beyond just like surface level points of view. We are moving into the whys of each point of view that we are now presenting. Now, when we're looking at how we teach discursive writing effectively, like I said, and I mentioned this right before, you need to get expose students to multiple discursive pieces. And we've given a few suggestions here already as to like how we can do it. Now, your prescribed text in Mod C, if you are already in the Year 12 course, obviously you've got some fantastic work there from like Margaret Atwood if you're doing the advanced course, or you got the hybrid form of like what's her name? That crafty feeling. Zadie Smith. There we go. Just had a
Yeah,
little bit of a mind blank
yeah,
there. Different sort
that's
of
a great
ideas
one.
there that are presented 100%. Discursively in nature. So again, they're a little bit more highbrow, and they're like that next level type of discursive response. However, I would say look at your local newspapers, look at your blog
Yeah,
spots, just as starting points, and get kids to sort of
yeah,
feed and have a read and just do that little bit of exploration. Like go out, kids, and really make them take ownership, because this is another thing that I would say is in this day and age, our students are just waiting for us to tell them everything
yeah,
and they've lost this intrigue or this enthusiasm to go out and be inquisitive about the world themselves. So you really want to pose them to be like, okay, what are a set of questions? What's something that I'm interested in? Oh, this is cool. That is aligned, I would say. This is probably a key thing as well with like big human values or societal values, because they're going to
yeah,
align really well with the stimulus material that you'll receive. But once they've got that idea, get them to go out and research some blogs or research some essays. There's plenty of things involved online, even modeling pieces. So I know a lot of us would probably have great responses from past students that we would have spent lots of time helping to
yeah,
craft and helping to model. So you might not give the whole piece to the kids, but you might give them section by section. Well, here's the introduction. Why is this an effective introduction? So get them to deconstruct it. Don't tell them it was good, but get the kids to see, well, what are the elements that this previous student has done well, and what can they then, and get them to write this down. What can they then use in their own piece? Embody in their own piece. I know you and I have had these discussions about some students that we've had in the past who just sort of, even with the discursive response, are like, well, is this right? And you're just like, well, have you got me to think about the idea? Is it a thoughtful exploration? Like, those are the key things. What does a thoughtful exploration mean? So you might put a few dot points down for your kids as to what thoughtful exploration does entail. Is it just a rant? Does it sound like I'm just sort of having a conversation with my mates, or am I addressing this
mhm,
to my teachers? So there we go. These are questions that can get them to think about the academic tone there, and really
mhm,
instilling that within the kids rather than just saying, well, this is right, this is wrong. Because giving those feedback opportunities for kids to really think about it on their own, it gets them to get that ownership of their learning.
yeah,
I've been saying this recently with our Mod C task that we've had for Year 12, where again the feedback process, like we got them to do a writing portfolio, and in the feedback process, I was just popping questions like the whys, like why have you done this, or have you thought about this, or X, Y, and Z, rather than giving them suggestions for lines. And
mhm,
they're like, you know, I could see a few students were trying to gear me towards, well, is this right? What should I write? And I would go back and be like, well, this is your response. Why are you thinking this way about that perspective?
yeah.
And
Why did
here's
you
another sort of,
incorporate that? Yeah,
yeah, and here's another good little tip for teachers, because a lot of the times we feel guilty that, or we can have that level of, or the weight of guilt if students aren't getting the marks or whatever. But remember, students are at different levels in their writing journey. It's a process. it's not just I've done a one draft and I'm going to get that A range response. It's no, you have to understand where you're at. Now, if Mr. Manny here is going to be giving you guys suggestions as to what to write, and then we come back and we mark it, and we don't give it the mark that you think it's going to get, well, first of all, I'm marking Mr. Manny's own writing. Where is the blame going to fall? Oh, you wrote that, so how come I got a certain mark? So that's a nice way of framing it. And then another sort of thing you can say, this is a good tip for teachers, is in the exam, if you don't have your processes down pat of your individual sort of thinking, we're not there to hold your hand. We'll be there staring at you and looking at you and maybe crying internally as to, the fact that the student has not developed their internal processes. But I think those are some questions you can pose to the students afterwards to alleviate that sense of guilt that we can often feel. And it takes the pressure off you. And draft is ridiculous. Like, especially in English, we probably have the biggest load there when it comes to looking over assessments. So
absolutely, any way that you can put that onus back on the students, is always going to be beneficial. Absolutely. I was just thinking as well, I like that idea of deconstructing, because I know that the website, The Conversation, has so many articles, like things that are relevant, society-wise. But I know I've even trolled it a few times. Like, let's say I've studied a text and I want to just get an article that's reflective of one of the issues, and then I'll just search and I'll troll through, and eventually I'll find something that's, because it is that The Conversation, it's got that more thoughtful discussion tone, it is formal and well written. It will also include like anecdotes and humor and give those little elements of flair. But even something that teachers might like to do, they might like to model it, and I don't actually mean model the actual writing of a discursive, but I think you touched on, you spoke quite well about that idea of the thought and the process, and that's what's most powerful for them to be able to replicate that when the time comes in the exam. And so, you might actually model the process. So you might put a topic or an issue on the board, give your class a few minutes to think. And when you think about it, a lot of our English lessons are very discursive in their nature. Sometimes there are lessons where you are dictating to the students what they should do, or maybe what they should know. But a lot of the times, the nature of our subject and the nature of exploring literature is discursive. And then the only reason that students can form their own opinion eventually to produce an essay is because of all the discursive discussions they've had along the way, which has then allowed them to observe these multiple perspectives in order for them to eventually choose one of their own. But you could model this process. You could put the topic on the board, you give students a minute to think, then you could open up the floor and you could visually map each different student that has a different, perspective or a different insight. That could be its own separate point. And then what example did they give? Did they give an anecdote? Did they use an idiom? Did they make an allusion or something? They make a pop culture reference. That would be like that example, that evidence. And just, I think sometimes allowing students to have that opportunity to be discursive, but also be able to see the visual. Once they get that it's about various perspectives, usually that's, I think they have the light bulb, and then they're like, okay, then they get down to the nitty-gritty of trying to actually write it down and organize it. But I totally agree. I think you make an excellent point for students, teachers, sorry. I mean students as well, but really teachers teaching it. You got to teach that process. If you are not having discussions in your classroom, start having those, because that's what I know often I would refer back to. I remember when this student suggested this and that student suggested that. I found that really powerful, because it was like real life discursive, points and discussions that I could draw on and be like, well, how could we just put that in the paper form rather than just a general classroom conversation? How could we make it more formalized instruction, right?
Yeah, no, exactly right. I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head there, where we again, another little sort of thought that we can leave with our teachers is you want to be able to teach the exploration, not just the writing. It's that process. So when you build that sort of confidence amongst the students in themselves, the marks are going to naturally follow. And I think that's the thing. Like, in this day and age, even when you think about it, we're all looking for that instant high. Even as teachers, sometimes, well, how do I get this kid from a 5 out of 20 to a 20 out of 20 instantly, rather than thinking about, well, what's the exploration? What is the process of building this student up so the success is going to be sustained? Like, I think that's one of the big things in teaching as well. We could do a discursive piece on this, and we're naturally, even in this little talking time that we have right now, we're being discursive in nature, aren't we? As to different ways to approach this writing process and how to teach it, and what are different ways in which we can teach the method of discursive, or whatever it is that we explore each day. But we want to be able to develop sustained success for our students. So it goes beyond the HSC examination or whatever exam they're doing, beyond the mark on the page. If you think about it, for a kid to think discursively in life, they're going to be a well-rounded individual. And I think that's one of the great privileges of teaching the discursive form to our students. Establishing great character, and they're no longer, hopefully, will just be, well, I saw this on social media, that's all I'm going to think now. They're looking at a variety of perspectives, and they're getting or developing their informed understanding, and then they decide to follow whichever echo chamber or path they pursue along the spectrum. And that's important. And then it's important to sort of, I guess, make those real life links as well for our students. Like, why is this discursive writing important? There we go. That's your long-term sustained success. Get that relevance in there. I know that's a key word that a lot of different teaching styles work, relevance. And I think that definitely does work. But look, if you're teaching, again, I'm just going to say that one more time, you're teaching the exploration, not just the writing. Okay. And I think that's a great little piece to sort of end on there, I guess, with our teacher question.
I think so. Well, I hope that everyone, student and teacher alike, has enjoyed our little discursive discourse on discursive writing, I should say. And hopefully it's just given some pointers, some directions, just to give that extra bit of confidence. I find, once students begin and once teachers begin, it starts to, because it's such a natural, I think, way of being and thinking, this idea of we're just going to have a conversation and see where it goes. So once we kind of demystify that a little bit, I really enjoy discursive writing. I really enjoy watching the students produce their discursive points and ideas and responses. I think just like you said, we go back to that idea. It's about that thoughtful exploration, and then the writing will come after that. I think that's an excellent place to leave our episode for today. So we hope that everybody's enjoyed listening. We hope you've all enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for many more coming your way. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share our content if you are enjoying it. We are definitely trying to produce a lot of different things that might be helpful for you guys. We're noting we get a lot of listens towards the end of the week on the drive home, so it's actually really nice to know that towards the end of the week you have a little bit of a listen, and to know that we're in other teachers' ears, hopefully giving them a nice, either some info or just even a distraction, is really good on our end. So thanks so much, everyone. Anything else, Adriel, you think I might have missed off?
No, I think you're good. Enjoy the rest of your term, and you'll be hearing from us soon.